Well, good morning. My name is Mike Bryan, volunteer at the Southern Arizona VA in Tucson, Arizona. Today's date is April 13th, 2017, and we're at the home of Terry Johnson, Terry?
Correct.
Right, okay. At the home of Terry Johnson, Air Force pilot and officer. And just wanted to get your full name, Terry, and then your birth date.
It's Terry Dean Johnson, March 18th, 1943.
1943. Well, let's just jump right in here. In the beginning of your story in the Friday Pilots is how I happened to be introduced to you. There was a story in there about the Edmund Fitzgerald. And I hadn't heard that for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mentioned the incident with the Edmund Fitzgerald in the book because when I was a college student, I worked aboard that ship for about 3 months. And it was an interesting experience. I mention it because the small town that I grew up in is where the work was done on that boat, and probably put it on the map a little bit from the song. Anyway, it was an interesting experience.
How big a boat was that?
It was about
a
ship. Yeah, it was about 1,000 feet long.
About a fifth of a mile.
Yeah, and you know, I can't tell you the numbers, how much tonnage it carried, and all the rest of that stuff. But it was an interesting experience in that I think that all young people should have a job like that for at least for a short period of time. And I think that you go through life and you meet lots of people, and you try to glean something from everybody, regardless of whether they're a high-ranking officer or a professor or whatever, or some guy that's a laborer. You can learn something from all those people. And I was kind of mentored by a guy that I worked with on the boat, and he was an older guy. Of course, he was probably 45 or 50, so nothing like what I think is old now, but he always encouraged me to go back to college and do something besides working on his ship. And of course, I think I was smart enough to know that already, but he reinforced that, and it was kind of nice of him to do that, to show some concern for a young guy coming up that maybe could learn from some of the mistakes that he made. Unfortunately, he was killed in an accident while I was there, and so I never really got to spend a lot of time with him, but it was a good experience from that standpoint.
Kind of reinforces the idea that you don't want to be doing that kind of work.
Exactly. I mean, you got to do a little bit of it to find out you don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what life was like for you. You were born in Minnesota.
Correct. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, and fairly normal childhood. It was pre-Vietnam.
What year was this? You're talking
I graduated from high school in 1961.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of just kind of growing up when the Vietnam thing was going on. And I played sports as a kid, but I was not good enough to make our high school hockey team, which was a big sport in Minnesota. And the hockey team won the state championship 2 out of the 3 years that I was in high school. So it was a pretty good team. Matter of fact, a lot of the guys went on and played college hockey. One guy made it to the pros. So it was pretty good. Anyway, because not totally because of that, but at least in part because of that, I took up skiing, downhill and slalom competition skiing. So I did that in high school and in college. And that opened the door for me to get out of the frozen upper Midwest once in a while in the wintertime, because we had competitions in the Rocky Mountains. and sometimes as far west as Washington State. It was kind of an eye-opening experience for me because I was, 15 years old at the time. I'd never been out of Minnesota. So now I would go out and we would take a train, that kind of stuff. A team would go out on a train. And it was kind of an interesting experience. It was the first opportunity that I had to kind of see the world, so to speak, or see something other than Minnesota. And I finally figured out that in January there was places that were not like Minnesota. Maybe that's partially why I'm in Tucson.
Well, you said that there was you were developing this wanderlust already, it sounds like, but there was an experience you had flying in a Cessna, I guess, when you were in college that really set the tone.
Well, I talked about the very first airplane ride I took. It's kind of funny because I took off, but I didn't land. So there was a couple of us that had gone to, I went to Alta, Utah. I took a semester off of college. Actually, not a semester, a quarter. We were on the quarter system. And I went to Alta, Utah to ski. I was a ski bum. Worked in a lodge, washing dishes. Worked with a guy that had a PhD from Oxford. He was washing dishes too. But we all wanted to ski. That was the whole thing. So we got free skiing. We got free room and board, and that's all we were interested in. Anyway, one of the fellows that I met from Southern California was my same age. We were both about 19 at the time, and we got this bright idea that we were going to try skydiving. So one of the guys that we worked with us was actually a ex-Marine fighter pilot. He was actually the wingman of the fellow that wrote the book Ride the Thunder. It was a couple of F-8 Marine guys trying to top a 50,000-foot thunderstorm, and the lead airplane flamed out, and he ended up falling down into the thunderstorm. Anyway, the guy that was his wingman was the guy that took us for a ride in a Cessna. We took the door off the Cessna, and we got about 15 minutes of ground school teaching us how to make a PLF, or a parachute landing fall. And so none of us had a clue what was going on. Anyway, we decided that we were going to try skydiving. And so we did. We went out and we rented this plane, and this other Marine fellow flew it. And we went up, and I drew the short straw. I was the first guy. There was three of us. I was the first guy. So anyway, you climb out on the wing, and not on the wing, you hang on to the strut, and you stand on the wheel, and the pilot holds the brake so the wheel doesn't turn, and then you just let go. Well, when I let go, I thought, you've made some bad mistakes in your life, but this one is the biggest one so far. Because falling out of an airplane is not like anything else you do. I mean, you can jump off of things into a swimming pool, or you can do things that you never get up to terminal velocity on. But falling out of an airplane is different. You fall for quite a ways, and of course it scared me half to death. But then when the chute opened, it was kind of fun, and we landed back at the airport and had a good story to tell. But I never did it again.
You said it was like practicing bleeding.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So what led to the Air Force then?
Well, this is later when I went back to college, and at that time I was a junior in college, and a friend of mine had gotten his private pilot's license, so he was flying around in a Cessna. And he took myself I guess we had somebody else with us, for a ride just on a Sunday afternoon, and I had always kind of thought about flying in the back of my mind, but I'd never really seriously pursued it. Anyway, I looked at what he had done, and I thought, well, if this guy can do it, well, I can do it. So I went back and started looking into what it took to get the ratings and you know, get you through the school and everything. So that's what I did. I pursued that for, I guess a year or so, and managed to get my commercial and instrument rating and all that sort of thing.
Is that the one that you got that with that money that your dad had given you?
My father had given me a graduation present prior to my graduation, and I could have taken that out and spent it on something that I would never have gotten any return from, but I elected to invest it in what turned out to be a career. And so I pursued that for a while, and when as a junior in college, I had 2 more years before I was going to be subject to the draft, because they were drafting everybody, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm not too excited about going in the Army. So if I pursued flying, and along the way I met a guy from, I was flying an airplane at a fixed base operation. The owner of that airplane was a physician, and he was also a flight surgeon in the Air National Guard. Turned out that I flew his airplane quite a bit, and during the course of that we became friends, and he said, well, you know, what do you think about trying to be a pilot in the Air Force? And I said, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. So I took all the tests, all the written tests, and I passed the physical test, all the stuff you have to go through to qualify for that. And I actually had a little bit of a physical problem. I had a thing called a right bundle branch block, which is nothing terribly, not physically disqualifying. I mean, half the population has it. But he went to bat for me, and one of my records went down to, I think it's Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio. He sent some notes along with it, and kind of went to bat for me to get all that straightened out, and it worked out fine. So anyway, he got me in the Guard, and at that time I had to wait about a year before I could get into pilot training. So meanwhile I finished college and everything. So once I was out of college, it took me about another year to get a slot in pilot training. That's just kind of how it works. The Guard units get only a couple of slots a year, so it's not like they're, you know, you can just walk in and do it.
Well, the doctor was he the one you taught to fly, or?
I taught him to fly.
Yeah.
And
tell that story.
I didn't totally teach him how to fly. He knew how to fly. I taught him a few things about using the aircraft in his job. He was a radiologist, and he lived in a small community in central Wisconsin, and radiology is enough of a specialty that there's not a radiologist at every hospital, at least not in a small community. So what he did is he did the X-ray stuff for a number of small hospitals. They were all about 50 miles apart. So he was driving his car around to all these hospitals, and finally he ended up having a terrible car accident because he was putting in these long hours, going to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and coming home at 7 o'clock at night. And when that happened, I think he sat down and said, look, you know, something's got to change here. This just isn't working very well. So that's kind of when I got involved. I came down, and I was single at the time. I came down, I just lived with him for a summer. And what we did is we took an old car, made sure that it was mechanically sound, had good tires and batteries and all that stuff. We put an old car at every airport. So we took the airplane and we would fly to each airport. We'd hop in the car and we'd run into the hospital, do the X-ray work, ride back to the airport, hop in the plane, and fly to the next destination. And I think he had like 7 hospitals, and we'd do 4 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other ones on Tuesday, Thursday, that sort of thing. Anyway, he continued doing that for 20 years after I left, and everything worked out fine. We actually devised some homemade instrument approaches to some of these airports. Nothing with real low ceilings, but enough to get you in if it was a 1,500-foot overcast or so, and do it safely. Because we knew that, the kind of thing you look out the window and there's the gas station, you turn to a heading and count to 30 and, that kind of stuff. Anyway, it worked good for him, and I enjoyed it. It was a great time, and I'm very grateful for what he had done for me. When I got qualified with the Guard and had been flying with the Guard for a couple of years, I'd always wanted to take him for a ride in the F-101 because that was a 2-seater airplane. And we could just never put it together. We were just never in the right place at the right time. But the 101 was a very high performance airplane. He would have just loved the max performance supersonic climb in that thing.
Was he the one that you went to the Frozen Bowl, or what was that football game?
No, I flew his airplane. And that was a story that happened actually before he got me involved with the military. There was football fans will remember a bowl game they called the Ice Bowl, and it was between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. And I was living in Duluth, and I had a friend who had tickets to the game, and we also had the fellow that did the announcing in the stadium. The stadium announcer lived in Duluth. He was a TV personality. So we struck up a deal to fly him down to this game, and so we left early in the morning. I had to get him there early so he could run through all the stuff he had to do for his announcing. Flew down. This is in January now, and we flew down and got there about maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. The game was at 2 in the afternoon, something like that. So the airplane sat on the ground from 11 in the morning until the game was over, which was back about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That coupled with the traffic and the post-game stuff, and it was probably 6 o'clock in the evening before we got heading home. The airplane wouldn't start. So what they do in the north is they'll have these heating units, and they'll put 100-degree hot air on the engine, and that will loosen up the oil and make the engine easier to start.
So how cold was it at
It was
the time?
30 below zero. It was 21 below zero during the game, and it probably had cooled off a little bit when the sun went down. So the engine wouldn't start, so it was popping and banging and backfiring and everything. I never thought twice about what was going on. We got the airplane started, and I just signaled to the ground guys to button us up, and we're not getting out of this. We're going to get out of town while we can still keep this thing running. Anyway, we flew back. If you can kind of draw a line from Green Bay, Wisconsin, up to Duluth, Minnesota, that goes over an awful lot of wilderness country. There's not a whole lot out there. So now we're looking at it's a clear, a 1,000,000-mile visibility evening, night. But along with that comes strong winds out of the northwest that's just blowing all this cold air in. So we're bucking headwinds all the way home. I was going to be real smart and fly at a lower altitude, so I didn't have to encounter these high headwinds. that was a good idea, provided everything worked. We got about 3/4 of the way home, and the engine started running really rough. And rough enough that I couldn't maintain altitude with the airplane. So we were in a gradual descent. And I knew where I was, and I knew that there was an airport ahead of us that my plan was to make it to that airport. And I had set myself up on about a 45-degree angle, and I was following a road that would have taken us to the airport and would have given us kind of what pilots call a base leg turn. You're making it turn onto the final approach to the airport. Well, that worked fine, except the engine quit. So totally quit. So now we're in the dark, and I've got a flashlight tucked underneath my arm and trying to see what's going on. As luck would have it, there was a car on the road ahead of us, and I landed I landed on the road. I landed right over the top of this car, and I used his headlights to illuminate the road in front of us, and we got lucky again. There was no power lines, because if there'd been power lines, I wouldn't have been able to see them because it was dark. So we didn't hit anything. We dented one wingtip on a mailbox. Got everybody on the ground safely. The announcer, he'd been in the news business, so he understood the value of breaking news. So he calls the TV station. This was now, probably around 10 o'clock at night, because we didn't get out of there till 7 o'clock or so, and it's a 3-hour flight, something like that, back. So my dad's watching the 10 o'clock news to see how the football game went, and this newscaster breaks in and tells him about this airplane that landed with this sportscaster on board. Well, of course, he knew that I was flying the guy, and so he just about had a heart attack over that. But anyway, we got on the ground safely. I ended up flying the airplane back the next day after we found out what the problem was. We had dislodged the filter that managed to turn sideways and block the airflow into the engine. And at the time, they didn't have an alternate air source for that airplane. I think that's something that they changed partially due to that accident.
So all the sputtering and all like that probably had
lack of
dislodged
oxygen.
that filter.
Yeah, I mean, I had plenty of gas, and but you gotta have air to make it work.
There are essentials.
Yeah.
Well, what comes after? Does that kind of blend into the Air Force stuff, or the?
Well, that happened.
International
That actually happened before. That was about. I was about a year before I had graduated from college, and I continued flying light airplanes, but I got involved with. I took some ROTC courses when I went back to school. I didn't finish a whole program with ROTC, but I took some of the flying stuff, and I enjoyed that, and it kind of exposed me to what the military was doing. When the time frame is when I graduated from college, I spent that summer with the doctor that had recommended me to the Guard, with him, and I got in. My flight school dates began the following spring. So that's when I started Air Force training. I came out to Williams Air Force Base in Phoenix, and I went through all the same training that everybody else goes through. I think some other guys have probably explained it to you that you start off in a Cessna airplane, which is just like the one you would fly as a civilian. I did well in that because I already had a lot of light airplane experience, so I started off great. And but then we moved into the T-37 was the next step, and flying airplanes is like any other occupation. it's a building block process. You know, you don't put a, there's a reason why there's residents in hospitals and assistants in surgeries. You don't just jump into it doing it right off the bat. You have to learn along the way, and you can't take a guy who has no experience at all and put him in a high performance airplane. Because all that's going to do is get him killed. So what you do is you build yourself up, and the next airplane on the training list was called the T-37, which is a small twin jet airplane. It was not particularly high performance by military standards, but by civilian standards, it was a fairly high performance airplane. It's about 350 knots, something like that. And it was your introduction to an ejection seat airplane, wearing a parachute, helmet, flying formation, that kind of stuff. So you got into that, and that was about a 6-month program. And then the last phase was the T-38, which is the supersonic high performance trainer. And that's a big step. That's a major jump in performance from the T-37.
Is that the one they call the White Rocket?
Yes, yeah, that was kind of its nickname, and yeah, it was a real. I think everybody that goes through the program realizes that this is a pretty serious airplane. You gotta. If you don't take the bull by the horns, the airplane's going to take you by the horns. It's one of those kind of things that it's just a very high performance airplane, and that the reason for that is because if a guy's going to go into particularly fighters, this is just another stepping stone, because the fighters are another notch above the T-38, and it's just something you have to master. My pilot training class was about the same as everybody else's. We started with 100 kids and we graduated 50. That's about normal. I don't know for sure what the Navy is. I suspect they're about the same. But all of the guys in the Friday pilots have had the same experience. All of their classes had about the same success rate. And there's a reason for that. It's they can't turn people loose with high performance airplanes that haven't figured out how to do it. Given that, it's still a learned skill. You'll learn how to do it. It's not magic, but you have to show some aptitude to that.
In your book, or in the book, it talks about the F-102 school beginning on a chilling note.
Well, when I got out of after I got my wings and went on to the further schools, I started out by going to Air Force Instrument School, which is, they spend, I don't remember, it was 2 or 3 weeks that we spent just under a hood. You know, all we did is instrument flying, which is a good background for what I did. Intercepts, we did a lot of our flying at night, and night flying is not a lot different than instrument flying. It's a little bit of both. But when I showed up at, I went to Ellington Air Force Base for F-102 school. When I showed up there, a guy had been killed in a class that was a couple classes ahead of me. And I can remember one of the very first rides I had in the F-102, in the TF-102, which is a 2-seat trainer version of the 102. I can still remember my instructor telling me, he said, "Look, this airplane will kill you if you give it a chance." And he was right. You had to really pay attention to what you're doing, because it was very easy to get disorientated. We would do most of our training at Ellington is out over the Gulf of Mexico. That's where we had our airspace. And you get a night where you could see the stars in the sky would be up above you. You'd see some lights from oil rigs down below you. There would be wispy clouds in between. And a lot of our maneuvers required coming off a target upside down and just being in unusual attitudes. Well, you look out the window and you don't know if you're upside down or right side up, because the stars are here and the ground is here, and it's real easy to make a mistake. So you had to pay attention.
Well, you're not flying the Cessna anymore, are you?
No.
So then, talking about so one of the pilots had died in a crash doing rollovers or something. Is that, you were talking about?
Oh, he was, I don't know the exact details of that accident. It was a low-level mission at night, so he was close to the water. And I suspect that he flew it into the water.
Tell me about this. It's kind of intriguing. The F-101B, the Voodoo. You said that was a beast of an aircraft.
It was a beast. In its day, it was a very high-performance airplane. By today's standards, if you look at the F-22 and the F-35, it's not as good a performer as they were, or as they are. But in its day, it held the time to climb record for a while, and it was a very high-performance airplane.
You said you took 2 time zones to turn it around.
Well, it was a forerunner of the F-4. McDonnell Douglas built it, and they corrected some of the things in the F-4. One of the limiting factors was that it had a high T-tail, which meant that you couldn't turn the airplane quite as aggressively as you'd like to, because you'd block out the airflow with the wings going up to the tail. And if the tail didn't get any air, well, then the airplane would do what was called a pitch-up maneuver. It would snap vertical on you, and it would get everybody's attention. But I never did it. I never got myself in that position. But one of the recovery techniques was, if you didn't get it figured out by 10,000 feet, you better get out. You're not going to fix it in the last mile.
Go while the getting's good.
Yeah. So, but it was an interesting airplane. It was not my favorite. I liked the 102 better, but that was just my personal preference. I kind of preferred a single engine, single pilot airplane. But that was just me.
You tell the story about you were, I think, in the National Guard, and you were just showing. I mean, that unit was showing aircraft, and so you were out there guiding visitors through and showing. Was that the 102?
That was the 101, and if you've ever been to an air show, there's always what they call static displays, and they'll fly in airplanes from around the country, different type airplanes, and oftentimes they'll have a demonstration team there, that sort of thing. Air shows are a pretty big deal, particularly in smaller communities. For example, in Duluth, where we were, population of about 100,000 people, the air show was probably one of the biggest attractions of the whole year. Even here in Tucson, which is a much bigger city, they get something like 300,000 to 400,000 people come out to watch the air show that we have here annually. And they alternate years, but we always have either the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels come. Anyway, when you go to those air shows, you'll see airplanes on display, and you almost always will see, they usually get a young lieutenant to kind of greet the people that want to take a look at the airplane. They have a ladder, they'll have the ladder put up, and you let kids climb up and look in the cockpit and that sort of thing. And you never know how much influence you're going to have on a young person. You might expose that young kid to something that maybe he's never been exposed to before. Maybe he'll think about and say, well, maybe this flying is something that I would like to do. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I was at this air show, and one of my ex-teachers, high school teachers, came out, and he had a couple of young kids. I showed the kids the cockpit, and I got talking with my teacher, and this was now 10 years out of high school, and both he and I realized that I had changed dramatically in those 10 years. That he had happened to be an English teacher, and I barely passed his English class. But I had gone on and done okay with the rest of my life, and I think he, I'm not sure that shocked him completely, but you know, maybe he did. Maybe he thought, yeah, this kid, he can't get through my English class. How's he ever going to get through military flight training? But anyway, it's part of maturing. And
So did he say anything to you, or was it you?
well,
What was going on?
he just the normal stuff. He thanked me for showing the kids they played and that sort of thing. And I think that I don't remember exactly what he said. He was glad to see one of his students go on and do okay for himself.
That's the reward a lot of teachers have,
Sure.
isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, tell me a little bit then. Tell me a little bit more about what happened after that, and then as you went through the Air Force National Guard, just where you were deployed and the additional training that you might have had.
Well, the only time I was never deployed. The only thing I did was we'd have we'd go TDY, and we'd go down and fire some live armament from time to time. That was it. You know, the 2 weeks of summer camp, that sort of thing. Yeah. We had my unit in Duluth had the 24-hour alert commitment. So we had armed aircraft on standby 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I did that for several years.
So there was at some point, and this probably gets into your thought processes at the time, but you were wanting to be more at home, and there was it's just like the Air Force wasn't providing I don't know if it was the security or give us a little insight into what your thought processes were.
You always go through life and you get faced with some of these decisions, and it's a decision I've thought about for a long time. I really enjoyed military flying. I wanted to keep doing it, but the dilemma I was faced with is that if I stayed in Duluth, Minnesota, I wasn't going to do what I wanted to do. I was going to end up doing. I could stay flying, but that would have been fine. But my regular job, if I took a job downtown, I would have been. I don't know what I would end up doing. Something that I didn't think would be very interesting. So I had to make a choice, and nowadays it's a little different, and I think the Guard and the Reserves are pretty accommodating to people nowadays. They sort of bend over backwards to let people do what they want in civilian life and still be part of the Guard.
Well, they're used in the defense in a much different way than it was back when you were.
Right, the Guard has changed dramatically. I mean, the Guard is an integral part of the active duty military today. I mean, they do as much. I mean, they're as qualified to do as much as the regular military does. They were quite qualified in my day. I mean, we won competitions against the regular Air Force where we as Guardsmen won. But anyway, I was confronted with the dilemma. What am I going to do with this? You know, I mean, what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be 40 years old and sitting in the alert barn, which is what I thought could happen. I guess that wouldn't be the end of the world if I did that, but I just thought that I could do something else. So anyway, I started looking around a little bit, and I got offered a job at Gates Learjet as a test pilot. And it was kind of a neat deal, and there's several, a couple of the other Friday pilots that are involved with Learjet also. What it was is, they never told you on the resume, but a prerequisite was that you had to be a fighter pilot. Lear would not hire somebody to be in the testing program that hadn't spent a little time upside down doing things you do in fighters, you know. That was his prerequisite. So anyway, I got the job, and I really enjoyed the job. It was a a lot of fun. I was just kind of getting the hang of it, and I got I got a call from North Central Airlines, and we agonized over that decision as well, because I liked the Lear job. It was great, and I was home every night, which is a real benefit. But we looked at what I was getting paid at Lear, and I looked at what the airline guys were getting paid, and I thought, there's a pretty big difference there. So I ended up taking a job with the airlines, and I could have probably stayed in the Guard if I had gotten that airline job initially, because I could have probably worked it out where I could have stayed in the Guard and still flown for the airlines. It would have been a little bit difficult, particularly as a junior airline pilot, but I think it could have been done. And today, if you look at the Guard guys, 3/4 of any Guard squadron is airline pilots. And as a matter of fact, it's so much so that the military today, the airline or the Air Force is actually entertaining kind of a trade-off thing with the airlines, where the Guard guys can fulfill their Guard commitment, and at the same time they can fulfill the airline commitment. And they're both mutually compatible with one another if they schedule everything right. So because the airlines are looking for military trained pilots, they already know that when they get a guy that's been through military training, they don't have to do nearly as much work with him as they do with somebody that hasn't had that training. So it's potentially can be a good deal for everybody, but that did not exist back when I was in there, so that was not an option.
So talk a little bit about, then follow through with what did the career look like then?
Well, when I went to work for the airlines, I started off as a first officer, and it was kind of funny. My class had 8 students in it, and 5 of us were fighter pilots. There was only one civilian guy, and my chief pilot, the guy that I worked for, was an ex-fighter pilot. So we all had a lot of background, a lot of commonality, and it was great. It was North Central Airlines was a small airline. It was very personable. We sort of took care of each other. If I had a commitment for some Sunday or something, I could get somebody else would fly for me, and vice versa, and we'd take care of each other. Once the airlines got bigger, and what happened in the airline business was that it really started with the deregulation of the industry back in the 80s, I guess. The airlines were forced to consolidate, and when they did that, they expanded. We took 2 or 3 smaller airlines became one bigger airline. And if you look today at United and American and Delta, Delta, I think, which is what I ended up with, I think is a combination of about 9 or 10 airlines when it's all said and done. And all the rest of them are the same. American and Continental, United are the same way. When that happened, of course, then the personality changed. It was no longer a small situation where I'll take care of you and you take care of me. It just became a huge company, and they couldn't do that anymore. So it's like everything else has changed.
Well, then one airline bought another airline,
Exactly,
airline, and so you're being moved around. Are you being moved around geographically as well?
Well, we tried to minimize that. I spent some time in Minneapolis with North Central. North Central bought a company called Hughes Air West. When they did that, they opened up the West Coast. So Claudia, my wife, is from Arizona, and I liked Arizona. So we said, this is a great opportunity for us. The Hughes Air West major base was in Phoenix. So we moved back to Phoenix, and managed to stay there for 5 years, and it was great. It was easy flying compared to the Midwest. I had grown up not just in the military flying, but also in the airline flying. I had grown up flying these small 50-seat airplanes in and out of these little small airports in horrible weather, and so I learned a lot from that. I got out to Phoenix, and we'd have to do an instrument approach on the West Coast every once in a while, but basically we had pretty good weather most of the time. It was not really, it was nothing like we had to deal with in the Midwest. I flew in and out of Detroit a lot of times, and they would get 30 days straight where it was like flying in a glove. You couldn't see you couldn't see past the windscreen, and you do that for 30 days straight, and you look forward to looking out and seeing the sun once in a while. The only time you ever see the sun is when you climb up on top of an overcast. So anyway, we moved back to Phoenix, and we're really enjoying life in Phoenix. And then the industry got deregulated, and that's when the real consolidation started. What began as North Central became Republic Airlines, because they bought Hughes Air West on the West Coast, and they bought Southern Airlines in the Southeast. That became Republic. Well, then Republic in turn got bought by Northwest Airlines. And Northwest Airlines had a reputation of not being a great place to work. They had all kinds of labor problems, and I went from a wonderful working environment to one that I didn't think was so great. But you make the best of it. You do what you got to do, but they looked at the West Coast as a business that was just not, the return on investment was not as good as they would like. They could fly an airplane from Minneapolis to Fargo, North Dakota, a 100-seat airplane with 50 people on it, and make more money than we could fly from Phoenix to San Diego with a full airplane, because the ticket prices were so low out here. And there was a lot of competition. So they decided to just minimize the West Coast, and when they did that, they closed the Phoenix operation altogether. That forced us to make some more choices. Where do we want to go? We had a choice of going to Minneapolis, Memphis, or Detroit. Well, we had lived in Minneapolis, so we could have easily gone back there. We knew what it was like. We had friends there. We pretty much eliminated Detroit right off the bat. I didn't want to live in Detroit. We knew what the weather was like there. Plus, Detroit was not a very interesting city. We would have been fortunate enough, I think, to live in the suburbs, so we probably wouldn't have seen that much of it, but we had met some people from the South, and so we got a little insight into what Memphis might be like. A lot of things they had some pluses there. It was a good family environment. The cost of living was fairly reasonable. It was a lot better than the Twin Cities. So anyway, we moved to Memphis. Neither my wife or I had ever spent any time in the South, so it was a little bit of a learning experience. I can still remember going there, and I remember we went into a cafe when we first got there, and this was around lunchtime, and there was a bunch of workmen who were in there having on their lunch break. And I can remember walking into this cafe, and I may as well have walked into a cafe in Mozambique because I couldn't understand a word they were saying. I didn't understand anything, and it took us a while to figure that out. But what happened is in the group of people we ran around with, a lot of people had gone away to college, so they had some other exposure to things other than the South. They had been educated in the upper Midwest or the Northeast or maybe out West, and so they brought a little little different perspective to the culture, and it was fun. It was a good place. We made some good friends there. We enjoyed it. We spent 17 years of our life in Memphis. The only one of the things, and you see this on the news. You go watch your 10 o'clock news tonight, and they'll probably tell you that if they haven't had it, they're expecting it to have some terrible thunderstorms going through the Midwest, particularly in the spring of the year, because you get the warm and cold air getting together, and they seem to get together right about that part of the country. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, West Tennessee, Kansas. And so made flying interesting at times. We had to deal with some pretty tough weather from time to time.
So as you're making these transitions in your work life, is this when you got involved in some of the like race car driving?
Well, there's certain things that you want to do in your life, I guess, and I mentioned earlier that I was in a situation where I got asked here recently, just a few months ago, about what I had on my bucket list. And I thought about that a little bit, and I thought to myself, I really don't have anything on my bucket list. I've been very fortunate in that I was able to do pretty much everything I wanted to do. I maybe didn't do it as well as I would have liked to have done it, but I got an opportunity to do it, which is something that a lot of people never get. So when the opportunity to get back in, I had done a little sports car racing when I was a college student. Never seriously, because I had no money. One of these things where I put a roll cage in a car and drove it to class on Monday and competed on the weekend, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When I was secure enough in my career, I was a captain on the airlines by that time, so I had enough. It wasn't like I had a lot of money, but I had some disposable income that I could do this with. So I decided to do it, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It's a learning experience, just like everything else. I crashed a lot of cars. I spent some time upside down, wondering what I was doing there, that sort of thing. And but it was fun, and it was quite challenging. I did it for about 10 or 11 years, and the family was supportive of it. They would go to as many races as we could. They couldn't make it to all of them, and I had some success with it. I got to the top level of national competition, national amateur competition, which is if you make an analogy between competing for a national championship in golf or in tennis or chess, I don't know, whatever you name the competition.
Baseball.
By the time you get to the national level, there's some pretty good competitors. Mm-hmm. So I was just fortunate enough to do it. A number of the guys, as a matter of fact, I have one friend that I've kept for all these years that went on to make a career out of motorsports, and he's done quite well at it. He writes for a couple of publications. He does TV commentary, that sort of thing. And I don't know what kind of a living he's made. I think it's been quite comfortable. He's not a household name, but the thing is that you have in every sport. You look at golf. You got 50 guys that are making a lot of money. Race car drivers are the same way. You got probably 50 guys that are making millions of dollars, and the rest of the guys are kind of tagging along. But that's true in every sport.
Well, you went into motorbikes.
Well, my Claudia, my wife, and I had done. We both had been introduced to motorbikes at a young age. I started off on a Vespa motor scooter. Claudia started off on a little Honda 50. and she already knew something about motorcycles before I ever got to know her. And so we did some of that when I was in the Air Force, and then we had kids, and
That cranker style.
is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
We had kids, and when you have kids, why, of course, your focus, they become a priority to your focus. And the latter part, when the kids got a little bit older, while they were in high school, we had a great cabin down on a big lake east of Memphis, and we had a great cabin that we shared with another family. We would ride motorcycles in the wintertime, and we would do water sports in the summer. My kids were all barefoot, they were water skiers and barefooters and that sort of thing. I tried it a few times. It was
It's out of your pay
it was
grade.
way out of my skill level. We did some motorcycling there and introduced the kids to it, and they liked it. They had a good time. We have a son. Our son was at the time probably 16 or 17 years old. I could ride with him for a couple of years, and he had a two-stroke dirt bike. And after I had been with him for a few years, I would try to keep up with him. And the closest I would ever get is I'd get to a fork in the road, and I'd try to smell which way the two-cycle engine went, because that's the only time I ever saw him. And he was, he was just he was a lot better than I was. He was younger, and he wasn't afraid to fall down, that sort of thing. So it was good. It was good for us as a family, and we enjoyed doing it. Once the kids, after the kids had left and they were all away at college, we decided to, and this is after I had decided to stop racing sports cars. We decided to get back into motorcycling because we both enjoyed it, but we neither one of us had really learned how to ride motorcycles. I was like a lot of people out there. We could do it, but I wanted to learn how to do it right. And they talk about technique is the religion of all dangerous sports or dangerous things that can hurt you. You got to learn how to do it right. It's just like flying an airplane. There's a right way and a wrong way. And so we went back and got involved. We went to several different schools as students, and these were primarily race schools. They were on race tracks. I had been an instructor in SCCA racing, so I had a pretty good feel for what you had to do in a four-wheel vehicle, but I didn't know much about two wheels. The dynamics was quite different. When you drive a race car quickly, you get to the point of where they talk about the adhesion, the grip level. When you get a car that's up close to the edge of that, the car starts to, you can feel it through the steering wheel. They talk about, and tennis is the same way, you talk about having a very light grip on the tennis racket so you can kind of feel what it's doing. Same thing is true with a race car. So you have a very light grip on it so that you can feel what's coming up through the suspension, through the shocks and everything. You know what to do. Same thing on a motorcycle. So when you get it up close to that limit, it'll start nibbling a little bit. You can tell when it's going to break loose. So I had a pretty good idea how to do that. And so it probably saved me a few times on a motorcycle because I could kind of sense what that feeling is like. My wife had a couple of pretty good crashes because she managed to go right through that nibble stage and got right into a full-time big slide, And
Well, from your perspective, how similar are flying jets and racing cars and racing motorcycles and there seems to be a common theme there.
Well, there is, in that you have to pay attention to what you're doing, and it's a little different. Tennis, a sport like tennis, isn't going to hurt you. You know, if you make a mistake, you lose the tennis match. But when you make mistakes in race cars or on motorcycles or in airplanes, you can get hurt doing that. So you have to learn to sort of focus everything out, and you concentrate on what you're doing. It's one of the things. Some of the guys in the group will talk about flying in the front seat versus the back seat of a fighter airplane. And most guys are a lot more comfortable in the front seat, just because it's now your task with flying the airplane. So you're paying attention to what you have to do to fly the airplane. And one of the worst things is sitting in the back seat, getting wrestled around by somebody in the front, and you have no control over it. You're just kind of looking out the window.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of similarities.
What are the you mentioned in your story there about courage and about discipline, and it seems like, and I wasn't sure, like, as I look back on it, just on what you were saying, it's like, if you didn't do very well with English class, at least, but then when you got into something that you really enjoyed, you excelled, and then you were able to, like, get it.
I think that's true, not for me in particular, but for anybody that pursues something that's challenging. There's been some interesting studies done about you don't have to be an exceptional individual to do well in a given skill. You just have to work hard at it. And part of that comes from. There was an example. I'm trying to think of this now. There was a teacher in Memphis who went down to Mississippi. Went to a small town in rural Mississippi, and it was kind of a social experiment, but it turned out to be quite interesting. He went down there and he was going to teach these kids from this rural school how to play chess, a game that they would never be introduced to. And a lot of these kids said, well, I'm too dumb to play chess, I'll never figure this out, etc., etc. He took those kids in a year's time from knowing nothing about the game to competing at the national level. Might have been longer than a year, but it was within a year or two, a fairly short period of time. So the moral of the story is that whether you want to be a concert pianist or a professional athlete or fill in the blank, whatever you want to do, if you're willing to put out the energy to learn that, and you're willing to have disciplined practice, you can get pretty good at what you want to do. The Air Force is a great example of that. In the Vietnam War, we had some pretty high loss rates early in the war, and a lot of it was because the guys didn't have enough training. That's when the Top Gun School in the Navy got started, and the Air Force's equivalent to that is called Red Flag, Fighter Weapons School. Mm-hmm. And what they do in those schools is they duplicate to the best they can the environment and the conditions or the challenges that you're going to face in combat. And they do it in an environment where you hopefully won't hurt yourself. I mean, once in a while they do hurt somebody because they got to make it as realistic as possible. But the objective is to take a guy out, put him in these difficult situations, let him make all the mistakes, come back, and we had this thing that we called it NADAR in the airplanes we had. I'm not sure what they call it nowadays, but you can come back and debrief that. You can look at what the radar was looking at. You can look at the picture that you saw, and you can say, well, now if you'd have done this, you'd have been better off than if you did that. And so you learn from it. And that's one of the things that you have to do in any pursuit like that. You got to make a few mistakes along the way, and they're all the same. Everything is the same. But repetition, over and over and over again, is what really builds that foundation for success.
And in your case and in your life, flying was really at the base of all that.
It certainly introduced me to it. Yeah, I think you can ask most anybody that's been through. You can ask any one of the Friday pilots, because we've all experienced the same thing. I'm not any great star, you know. Pilot training was difficult for me. I mean, I had to work real hard, and I think a lot of guys had to work real hard. When you figure that they that they lose 50% of the people, and they're already starting off with college graduates, so they're not people that don't have any idea what they're doing. They're have already jumped through a lot of hurdles just to get there. It's difficult. They make it difficult for a reason.
If you had, well, you got what, a son, two sons?
I have a son and 2 daughters.
And 2 daughters. And grandchildren?
1.
If they or someone their age was asking you about whether to go into the military or not, what would be your advice?
Well, I think that the military is a great deal. Our son is too old now. He's in his mid-30s. At the time when he was younger, I had hoped that he might consider the military, because I think it's a great background for things. He didn't do that. The girls, they were girls. They probably didn't have the desire to do it. You know, girls today can have a great career in the military just like they have anywhere else. But our kids, I don't think were. Our one daughter went to an art school kind of college in New York. She's more of an artsy person. I think one of the things that our country does today that we're missing the boat on is that we should do things like Israel does. I think that we should take every kid when they're 17 or 18 years old and they graduate from high school, we should take them out and have them do something. Get involved with some sort of community service, put them in the Peace Corps, have them do something, go in the military. And make that a mandatory deal for all young kids that are physically capable of doing it. Because that gives them a stake in the game. You know, if you don't have any skin in the game, it's real easy to stand on the sidelines and be critical of what's going on. We have such a small number of people today. I mean, I don't know if this number is correct, but they say that there's only 1% of the population is in the military. I don't know if that's true or not, but it probably is pretty close. So we tend to know more military guys because we tend to gravitate towards them, but there's a lot of people out there that have no concept of what the military does, and they do an awful lot of good things. And I think that young kids today should have an opportunity to, you know, they can serve their country in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be in the military, but it gives them a better perspective of where this country came from and where we're trying to keep it going.
Well, if you had your grandson?
Daughter.
Yeah. And just trying to blue sky, you know, what you would like to see for her, what would that be?
We'll see. You know, that's so far down the road that her parents are doing a great job. She's a bright, you know, people brag about their grandkids, you know, but we do know some kids who've had some difficulties. Some of these poor kids that come up with parents that don't expose them to anything. You know, we have some friends that we're trying to adopt a child here a while back that they didn't do it, but they didn't adopt this kid because the kid was actually addicted to drugs because of the mother. The kid had to go through rehab. You know, there's a big difference between laying a kid in a crib and letting him stare at the ceiling, and getting a child out and interacting with them. You know, whether it's just putting blocks together or writing their name or doing something. I mean, our little girl's only 2 years old and she can do some arithmetic, you know, and it's because her parents expose her to that. They ask her questions, critical questions. What do you think of that? You know, how does that really? That gets people thinking. And they say that the first 5 years or so is very informative. And so anyway, I don't know what she would do. I hope that at some point in time she'll pick up this book and say, well, you know, I read a little bit about Grandpa and saw a little bit of what he did, and maybe some of the mistakes he made. I won't do some of those things. And
Was there any person in the while you were in the military and going through training? Was there any particular person that left
sure,
an indelible? Who would that be?
absolutely. I had several people that I really looked up to. One example would be in T-38 training. I had a instructor pilot for the first phase of that program that I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't good enough myself. And it turned out that he wasn't a very good pilot. And he got removed from the program. And I was lucky enough to my next IP was a fighter pilot. And he had just come back from Vietnam, and he was a very good pilot. And he was very, very demanding and very exacting. And he made darn sure that we knew how to do things right. And I really have appreciated that, because that sort of thing will save your neck. You know, it might sound like it's hard on you at the time, but it's really doing you a favor.
Sounds like that was one of the key lessons that you carried through different things that you did.
Well, absolutely. You know, he taught me a lot of stuff that I'm convinced that first IP would not have been able to teach me, because he just didn't know. And then when I got out in an active squadron and got flying with guys, I had a flight commander that was a great guy, that he'd give me as much responsibility as I could stand. You know, I mean, he'd have me brief missions. I'm briefing colonels and majors, you know, that sort of thing. And it was great. I exposed me to a lot of things, and he would go out with me, and we'd go out as a two-ship and do all kinds of racing around, and he taught me some things. I'd look out the window and he'd be on my tail. I figured, how do you do that?
Well, kind of wrapping up, is there anything that you would like to address or say, or anything that you wanted to add?
Well, I just feel very fortunate to be involved with the Friday Pilots. I think, like I said earlier, that I'm probably the least accomplished of any of the guys in this group. There's some guys that really had great careers, but we have the commonality of having similar backgrounds, and that's kind of the glue that holds the group together. You know, some guys went on and did a lot more with it than I did, and that's great. But they still accept me, and I appreciate that.
Super. That's a good place to stop. Okay. And thank you for your service.
Thank you for yours.